Hello and welcome back to A Better World. This is your host Mitchell J. Rabin and I'm very glad you're joining us again. Today we're going to be speaking with Deborah Koons-Garcia, who is a filmmaker up in this utterly beautiful place of hers in Mill Valley, California. Deborah has been the filmmaker of a couple of very important films such as The Future of Food and most lately Symphony of the Soil. We've had her on the radio show before, and now we're going to sit down and speak with her in person about the work she's been doing and the impact that it's having on the world. A world that has become very troubled relative to its food chain, its food supply, as well as the way we take care of and relate to our soil. So it's going to be these kinds of subjects that we talk about for the next period of time during this show. So welcome to A Better World, Deborah.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Mitchell.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure. So how did you first get into dealing with these very thorny subjects? I mean, most people would rather just kind of look the other way when it comes to genetically modified organisms. Most people say, actually, that what's the problem? No big deal. But you weren't one of those.
I wasn't one of those, no.
God bless you.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I became a vegetarian in 1970 when I was in college, and it was sort of part of the whole Back to the Land movement and all that.
Yes.
And I started really studying the relationship between food and health and food and social justice issues and food and politics. And the same year I also actually started making films. So changing
Back then?
Yeah,
Really?
when I was in college, which was
Wow.
I discovered it and it was just really fun. It wasn't documentaries, it was little fiction films I'd write and make my friends be in and stuff. It was really fun.
Yeah.
And so I had always wanted to bring together these two great interests of mine. So back in around the year 2000, I knew I wanted to make a film, and I knew I wanted to make I'd made all different kinds of films. I knew I wanted to make something serious, and I thought I would make a film about the food system and organic and how it was really important that people understand why organic is a good choice for the people and the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And so as I researched that, I found out about GMOs. I found out that they were genetically engineering seeds and that you had genetically engineered plants. And I knew what that was because I lived in California in the 70s, so I knew what recombinant DNA technology was, where you take DNA from one species and you use this technique and viruses and bacteria to shove it in another species. So I actually knew what that was, but I had no idea that they were using it on our food. And I was living in Marin County, and I was this sort of organic fanatic and highly educated about the food system and what I was eating and what it was doing to my body. And then here was this thing happening to our food that no one knew about. It was totally under the radar. So then the shift of the film went from just basically being a proponent of organic agriculture film to really revealing what GMOs were and how they were taking over the food system. So that was really important. But even before that, when I was growing up in Cincinnati, Ohio, and when I was 15, I did a science experiment called polyploidy in plants. And I mutated the genes of these seeds using a chemical, colchicine, and also using radiation. And polyploid basically multiplies the chromosomes. So if you have 10 chromosomes, you polyploid it has 20. So
you were onto this before Monsanto.
I was onto it. And so I did this experiment, I grew out these seeds.
Interesting.
And the normal ones looked normal, and the polyploided ones were thicker and deformed looking. And I actually won first prize in the Cincinnati Engineering Society Science Fair for botany. So, that worked out well.
Yeah.
But I realized even looking there, I was 15, I was growing these in my bedroom, right? And I was thinking, these plants I would eat, these plants I would not eat. And I was amazed at the effect I could have, being a teenager,
Sure.
just using these chemicals. And I took the radiation to my dentist, and he put it in his x-ray machine. The effect I could have on this obvious effect on this plant by such a simple means. And I remember thinking at the time, I was going to keep up with what's happening out there, because if I can do this, what are they going to be doing?
What are they going to do with hundreds of millions of dollars behind their R&D?
Yeah. So this idea of this, mutating things in this way, actually, it's very common. People, they do that now for seeds.
Well, the whole
and things.
idea of hybrids, anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, even just with taking things like heirloom tomatoes,
right,
and cross pulling out
Right.
the higher quality of tomato.
Right.
Could that be considered a form of engineering?
Well, that actually, when they say genetically modified organism, normally transgenic. When you think of when we think of GMOs, when we all think GMOs, that stands for genetically modified organism. Now, a better word would be transgenic, because you're taking a gene and moving it to something else.
From one
It's a
species, actually, to another.
Exactly. So that's a transgene. But what we popularly call it
Yes.
is genetically modified. Actually,
Yes,
when
that's
you
a very good
when you
point,
create
actually.
a hybrid, or
Yeah.
when you take a tangerine and an orange and cross them and get a Tangelo or something,
Yes.
you actually are genetically modifying, but you're not using transgenic. You're not interfering with the DNA of it. It's just sort of like breeding a collie and a Dalmatian or something like that. You're not defying the laws of nature. You're just doing something that might
Playing
not
with the
happen.
laws.
Yeah, it might not happen, but it might happen. It could happen. You're not forcing it to happen. So when people say, when these corporations say, we've been genetically modifying things for thousands of years. Look at hybrids. You say, yeah, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about transgenics. We haven't been doing that for thousands of years. We've been doing that for all 40 years. So that is it's a trick.
That's
it's
a very
trick when they
important
say that.
distinction. I'm glad I actually asked that question. 'Cause
That's right.
Honestly, I was a little uncertain about that.
Right.
And that really clears it up.
Right. Well, taking DNA from bacteria and putting it into something, taking DNA from human genes and putting it in a plant, taking it from a fish and putting, those are transgenics, and those are problematic, because the way that they actually use this technology is they make, and a scientist told me this, a guy who does genes, they make tens of thousands of attempts to do these to get what they want, and the one that isn't a monster they use. Because if you look at some of the things,
But it
that
still
they
has
try-
the potential to become a monster.
there's no question.
There's no question.
And now there's this thing called horizontal gene transfer, which they're finding, which is actually quite dangerous, that has genes transferring that normally wouldn't transfer. And the problem with these, and I've talked to
Transfer from where to
transfer
where?
from one species to another,
Oh.
because you actually create this, you create a system where, there's the integrity of the genome or the integrity of the cell. When you violate that integrity, it kind of screws things up. So down the road, it's more easily
You don't know what
violatable.
happened downstream.
That's right,
Yeah.
and that's the problem.
It's
is-
creating a monster.
yeah, and also the
in
other
reality.
problem. Yeah, exactly. They take the one. What the guy said, he said, take the one monster that doesn't look like a monster, and that's what they commercialize. So it's a very very tricky thing, because the thing about these transgenes is that they create novel proteins, because genes create proteins, and then the proteins, they make things
they
all
morph
happen.
into life.
Life. So they create novel proteins that have not co-evolved with the rest of the ecosystem. And you've got tons of different kinds of one creating God knows what protein.
Yes.
That's the problem. And people think that that's why possibly there are a lot more food allergies now, because we're
Yes.
eating these things that are creating novel proteins that might not agree with a certain person's system, so it throws off their immune system and they become reactive to it because it's something they have never experienced before.
Their body doesn't, just like with microwave food, where the
Right.
body doesn't recognize this substance as food.
Right.
Because it's been molecularly changed
Right.
so dramatically
Right,
that it is no longer recognized, or is it nutritious.
right.
It's been distorted. It's been.
It's
you know,
deformed.
It's malware.
That's
you
right.
know?
That's right. They deform. I
Yeah.
call it deforming it. They deform
That's right. They
the
deform
genome.
it literally.
Yeah.
So, well, this is very upsetting, And I'm going to just morph, if you will,
Okay.
right before your very eyes,
Okay.
into discussion about Symphony of the Soil, because of course the future of food had a lot to do with what we're talking about right now.
Right.
And was a major, impactful film for so many, giving so many people an education about genetically modified organisms and their effect on the food chain.
And the system that grows up around it.
And the system,
political
exactly.
system and the
monetary
seeds, all
system,
that.
economics,
Yeah,
seeds, exactly. And we can refer to that. But I want to just put a moment to more to Symphony of the Soil, which, as I was just describing to you before and on our radio show,
Right.
is really truly symphonic.
Thank you.
And it really is. It's a work of art.
Thank
and
you.
While you're welcome, and while it is highly informative from an educational content point of view, the structure of it, the music of it, and the imagery is so engaging. Ignacio Chapela, as I recall, was just such an amazing narrator of the film, and you brought in so many interesting ideas for us to really like play in the soil with. Really.
Yeah.
I would wish that you could bring forward the idea of using soil as for carbon absorption.
Right.
Because as we're looking out at the issues of global warming and climate change, here in what you talk about is so monumental an answer.
Right.
By just growing healthy organic food.
Yes.
That I would love for our audience to know more about that.
Yeah, it's really important to understand that. Well, the film, thank you for your kind words. The film is in 3 parts. The first, Act 1 is soil itself and its nature. Act 2 is our relationship to soil, which is primarily agriculture. And Act 3 is soil and big ideas. Soil and water, soil and feeding the world, soil and global warming. And so building on that information, basically in the first section we do this wonderful piece that's all hand-drawn animation, watercolor, talking about photosynthesis. Photosynthesis takes the carbon dioxide out of the air and turns it into carbon-based plants, so that's what happens. And then it puts that into the soil.
Into food.
Yeah, it makes it into food, and it puts that soil, it puts that into the plants, and it also feeds the soil microorganisms. Right. So that takes carbon out and makes it part of the chain of life. And then at the end of that, cycle of life, it releases it back into the air. So there's a point where the carbon from the carbon dioxide is sequestered in the carbon of the soil. That's carbon. It's there. It's in the plants. It's in the things we eat. It's in our body. So, and because of industrial agriculture, which is part 2, our relationship to the soil, we've actually pulled this carbon out of the soil and put it up into the air. Not only using, for example, fertilizer, nitrogen fertilizer, it highly energy dependent. So we use a lot of oil to create that. Lots of oil created for pesticides. We actually, when you take crops out of the ground, you're actually taking that carbon has gone into the crops. You're taking those away from the field, and people are eating them. So you're removing carbon from the soil.
Yes.
And when you farm in a not healthy way, you often have erosion, and so the soil itself is blowing away or washing away with water. So there's all kinds of ways in which our industrial agriculture has deprived.
As is the nitrogen, correct?
Yeah, nitrogen, yeah. So, and so especially the fertilizer, which is, creates dead zones and all those kinds of things. So in all kinds of ways, the way that we've chosen to grow our food has deprived the soil of carbon and helped put it in the air. So what we've realized now, and they've done studies at Rodale, we talk about this in the film.
That's a very important piece. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Right,
and we've studied this, and they've done studies now. It's like a big thing that people are studying, and the scientists and the kind of governments that meet about, they're starting to realize this. In fact, France, one of the things that France came out of this big climate conference was that they have a commitment.
COP21.
To commitment to add 5%, increase their soil organic matter, the carbon in the soil by 5%.
Really?
As a nation. And other nations have signed on.
That was part of the agreement that emerged?
It's what they agreed to do. France's one of the things France wants to do. And there have been others, Scotland has signed on, other countries have signed on, because that's the way you take the carbon out of the air, put it in the soil, without having to scare people about our change in lifestyle, which people don't want to. You can't drive anymore, or else global warming or no cars.
It's over.
That's the choice. Well, yeah, obviously we need to really think about our oil use.
Now they're saying, now you're going to have to eat organic food.
Have to eat organic food. Yes, you have to farm in a healthy way.
Yeah,
so that is, and people are realizing that, and some people call it carbon farming. I'm not crazy about that term, because healthy farming is carbon farming, And we should all be farming and growing and supporting these ways of eating.
Exactly.
So it is a way that we can take the carbon out of it. And if we, if I were Empress of the Universe and could declare from this day on, we will only grow organic food and return, and I mean good organic farms where they do composting.
Can we vote for you instead of someone else?
Yeah, I'm not, no votes, I'm just taking over. No, but
That's what they do anyway.
yeah, that's what they do anyway. But if you just declared it and we changed that everywhere, within literally a few years, we could make a huge impact on global warming, and relatively painlessly.
That is so interesting.
Yeah. Painless for us, painful for Monsanto, right? Painful for Monsanto.
And the other chemical companies that seem to thrive on the chemicalization of the food supply.
Right, and a lot of those chemicals that they put in the ground are damaging to the soil. They deform the soil. They don't make it function properly. They turn it into dead soil, and it blows off, rushes off in the water. So this idea, which is so positive that we can really ameliorate climate change just by eating healthy food.
I mean, it's like it's almost funny.
I know.
Because the solution is going to be that you have to get healthier.
I know, I know.
And enjoy your food more.
And have beautiful farms, that
Exactly,
grow
that
for local
fragrances.
humans. Yeah.
I now understand why the French initiated this, because if they do that for their grape vineyards, they're going to have even more pungent wine.
Well,
and that is probably their motivation.
Well, that's so
Which is
interesting.
fine.
It's true. And the other thing that I want to tell you is I did this little tour of Europe in October, and one of the places I went was to France and did a screening in this beautiful theater, where is it? Avignon, which was lovely, right next to the castle, this utopian theater, the coolest, very cool theater. And it was for the Chateauneuf du Pape appellation. Chateauneuf du Pape, is one of the most famous wines in the world.
Truly.
25% of their wine is now organic.
Really?
Of Chateauneuf du Pape, yeah. So
no sulfites, no.
Well, sulfites. I mean, wine naturally creates sulfites. I mean, sulfites is, sulfites are part of the process of making wine, and then at a certain point, I think people can add sulfites to stop it from keeping to ferment. But so sulfites, there are some organic wines that create sulfites. I mean, that have sulfites in them. I'm not sure where they are with that, but I do know that the grapes, 25% of the grapes
are organic. Organically grown.
And that is pretty incredible.
It's a step.
It's a step.
For something of that vintage quality.
That's right.
To have organic as a recognized value.
That's right. And as you said, that we have these short films called Sonatas of the Soil, and actually one of them is going to be on this PBS series called Natural Heroes. And there's one that's called Portrait of a Winemaker, John Williams of Frogsleep, and he talks all about his soil. And he says because he doesn't irrigate, and he dry farms, and he has the right varietals for that, the grapevine roots have to go down deep into the soil to bring up the water. They search for the water. They don't get it right on top like they're being forced fed. They search for it, and they bring up that water, and they bring with that water all the minerals and different things that go into the flavor of the grapes. So he has a very flavorful grape because of the way that he grows it. And so he doesn't have to do all these bells and whistles things that some grape growers have to do, because their grapes, they're over irrigated, and they're basically not getting that flavor from the terroir. They're getting whatever they're getting from being, having their nutrients fed them through water, and so they have no taste, so they have to leave them on the vine longer, so they have higher sugar content. So one of the problems in California wines is they leave them on the vine longer because they're irrigated and they don't have the flavor. They try to make it have flavor, but it has higher sugar, so it has higher alcohol. So that's why some people don't like California wines, because they have higher alcohol.
It's really interesting, and I happen to know that same idea is applied for tomatoes and other vegetables in Italy, where they are relying on the plant doing the searching by the root to grab the water from below.
Right.
And in that way, the plant has to make more exertion to live.
Right.
And then to thrive, and the flavor is thereby enhanced.
Right, the flavor is enhanced because of the nutrients it's bringing in from the soil. And also there is this idea now that by plants facing challenges,
Exactly.
that they develop these phyto somethings,
Nutrients.
phytonutrients, what the heck,
Yeah.
that actually create the flavor. And they're starting
Exactly.
to
That's where I was going with this. Now
right.
look at the net benefit.
Right.
Less water.
Right.
Greater flavor.
Right.
Stronger plant, more robust.
Yeah.
And the same thing, I bet, can be applied to humans.
I think that's really true.
And perhaps one of the problems with our society, I know the movie wasn't about this, but it still applies if you take the principles enunciated there and apply to, the human species.
Right.
When children are too babied,
Right.
and what I call the pathology of affluence
Right.
is too rampant, the kids don't have to
That's
really
right.
struggle for their own physical and emotional health at
Right.
an early age.
Right.
So they become thwarted
Right.
in later life.
Right. And I think that's...
It's a principle, is
Yeah,
what it
I
is.
think
a
it's true.
biological principle.
Yeah, I think a little bit of stress they know is a good thing. Not a lot of stress. A challenge is good because you have to grow to meet that challenge. You have to be strong to meet that stress. And you've met that stress, and that's a good thing, and then you want to take on more. Not the incredibly stressful stuff that a lot of us are facing today. I mean, that we shouldn't have to face those stresses.
Just as we were talking before, Deborah, that, even a childhood fever could be understood as a stress on the body,
Right.
and that challenge morphs into a much more robust immune system.
Right.
Just as an example.
Right.
And, because I am a stress management consultant, I deal with what is stress for one person is not for another.
Right.
So you end up realizing that what is stressful is actually an interpretation of an experience.
Right. Right.
And if we can learn to interpret our experience differently, we will not see things that were otherwise maybe considered by most as stressful.
Right.
And we say, oh,
Right, it's kind
nothing.
it's an opportunity.
It's an opportunity,
for
exactly.
growth, or an opportunity to test your skills of your skillful means of getting through
Exactly,
something.
your ability to be
Yeah.
resilient, for instance, exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the actually points that you're bringing up in the film too, is
That's right.
the resiliency of the soil and
Right.
treating it different ways and
Right.
using less water. And then there was one person in the film who said, this is not about plants, our
Yeah.
work here on this farm.
Right.
Our work is all about soil.
Right.
I thought that was so interesting.
Right. Yeah, the idea
Could
that
you-
you grow
yeah.
soil and soil grows plants.
Yes.
And I think that it's true with humans as it is with soil and farms and gardens and growing things, is that the more that we farm in harmony with nature, the better it's going to be. And I think that's the same way with humans. The more we live in a more of a natural rhythm, the way that humans lived for, a couple 100,000 years in smaller communities.
That's
and,
right.
all these things that are sort of more
Local growing, local eating.
Right, and these kind of sort of extended groups instead of such a tiny nuclear family, or
Yes.
sometimes that can be too much,
Exactly.
But I think that's...
It becomes nuclearly explosive.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that you're right, and that was one of the things that I realized in making Symphony of the Soil, is that there's this whole thing that we call the soil community, which is the microorganisms, the plants,
Exactly.
the caterpillars, all these kinds of things, and us, the critters the buffalo, everything, and us. We're part of that soil community. So
Exactly.
it's when we treat our soil right, ultimately in the long run, we're the ones who are going to benefit, because that's our community that we're supporting.
Exactly. I mean, as cellular biologist Bruce Lipton, a colleague and dear friend, reminds us all that our community in our body consists only of a certain number of human cells. We are far outnumbered by bacteria.
Right.
I mean, to the tune of trillions of
Right.
bacteria, and the human community is actually just a small subsection of that.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
And that's kind of like the soil too. The soil
That's
has
right.
all these microorganisms in
Exactly.
it that form the soil, and so we really are people of the soil, and we have that in ourselves too.
Exactly. Well, listen, I thank you so much for your good work in filmmaking. It's just, you're raising the conversation and the bar to another level. And I'm so thrilled that you've brought it to the United Nations, you've brought it to the USDA, you've gotten the ear of people who are influential. Now I want the president and CEO of Monsanto to say, Deborah, thank you.
We've seen the light. We've seen the light. We're going organic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thanks to you. Right?
And all of us.
Exactly. No, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing with us your...
And thank you for all your good work too. It's so important that we reach out and people understand that there are like-minded people pursuing our good intentions.
Exactly. Most welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Absolutely.
Thank you.
This is Mitchell J. Rabin for A Better World. Thanks so much for joining us again. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. We are shooting on location in beautiful Mill Valley. It's just fantastic out here. And it makes you want to take really good care of your soil and your earth. So thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you all next week.